Well, welcome to part 4 of our series that we've called Living Beyond Ourselves. It's our study on the spiritual gifts to learn how we can understand better the spiritual gifts and put them into practice in our lives. On screen, as a little reminder for you, here's some of the guidelines that we have discussed previously and we'll unpack in the next few sessions as well about how we can actually do this. Guideline 1 is about exploring the possibilities, and we're going to continue to do that today as we look at some more of the gifts, some of which I think are understood. Guideline 2 is about examining your gifts. Guideline 3 is observing your reactions. Guideline 4 is evaluating your effectiveness, and Guideline 5 says we can anticipate confirmation from others when we're seeking to use our gifts. So I want to dive straight in to looking at another gifts, and that's the gift of hospitality. This is maybe one that we kind of take for granted if we're sociable people, if we're people who like to have people in our own home. We may just think, well, this is something that we do, this is normal, this is natural, and certainly in many cultures, welcoming people into your home or providing for them food and shelter is something that's considered normal and just a part of the culture. And so because of that, we sometimes miss the fact that it can be a spiritual gift. Certainly in Hebrews 13 verses 1 to 2, it talks about the fact that we should practice hospitality. That should be a normal part. But Romans 12 also suggests to us that this may be a spiritual gift. We'll put the biblical references up on the screen for you so that you can follow along. So how might we define the gift of hospitality? Well, for our purposes, we're defining the gift of hospitality as God's strength to care for people by providing fellowship, food, and shelter. Again, we have said this may be something we want to do naturally, but I think there are also some distinctives that occur in people with this gift. There are people who provide an environment where people feel valued and cared for. So the gift of hospitality can certainly be operated in your own home, but there are other environments. In fact, there's a whole industry called the hospitality industry. So it's not just in our home. Meet new people and help them feel welcomed. This, of course, is a very important part of church life, but it can also be used in work and in family environments. Create a safe and comfortable setting where relationships can develop. Relationships are key in the life of the church, they're key in our families, and someone with the gift of hospitality will excel in this area. Seek ways to connect people together in meaningful relationships. There are just some people around the life of the church who are really good at connecting people, drawing people in, bringing them into relationships, making them feel welcomed and part of things very quickly. These people are to be honoured, and maybe they're expressing their gift of hospitality. They're people who set people at ease in unfamiliar surroundings. As with all the gifts, there are certain traits and with them certain cautions. So let's look at some of those on screen. People with the gift of hospitality we could expect to be friendly, gracious, certainly inviting, whether that's into their own home or in other environments, trusting, caring, responsive and warm. We don't want people who are not responsive, who are not warm, who are not caring to be part of the hospitality. It just won't work. People pick up on that. So these are traits that we should be looking for people. When we think about cautions about people with this gift, one of the things I think people do with many of the gifts, but certainly some of these gifts that are behind the scenes, is the idea of just seeing the gift, particularly of hospitality, as just entertaining. Well, it's not just entertaining. It is a spiritual gift to be used. And remembering that it's God who determines who we should befriend and maybe even serve. You should be careful not to cause stress in their own family home when inviting others into their home. That is a real danger. Often people with the gift of hospitality may welcome people in at all times into their family environment, and many times it will be suitable, but it must be understood in the context of the family that this is welcome, that this is valued. On screen now, we have a little article for you that shows how actually hospitality can be used in combination with other gifts, such as the gift of evangelism, by opening up our homes. Share the gospel by showing hospitality. Don't start with a big program. Don't suddenly think you can add to your church budget and begin. Start personally and start in your home. I dare you in the name of Jesus Christ. Begin by opening your home. You don't need a big program. You don't have to convince your leaders. All you have to do is open your home and begin. And there's no place in God's world where there are no people who will come and share a home. So maybe that's something that you can consider. Maybe that's a starting point for you to begin to explore and examine some of your own gifts of hospitality. Let's move on to another gift that I think is very valuable in the life of the church, and one that I've seen time and time again displayed to help, encourage and strengthen others. And that's the gift of mercy. On your screen there's a number of biblical references and examples where we see this taking place. Probably the most famous example is in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus actually is encouraging people and saying to people that we need to love our neighbours, that we need to go beyond and go that extra mile in terms of helping and serving others. So what is the gift of mercy? The gift of mercy is God's strength to cheerfully, appropriately, practically help those who are suffering or in need, and move by compassion to action. This is something we see very valuable in the life of the church, very valuable in our society, because so many people are hurting, so many people are judging themselves, so many people are filled with guilt and condemnation. And those with the gift of mercy just have this ability to come alongside, to show compassion, to be moved with compassion, to be able to demonstrate in many ways God's love to those in need. So what are some of the distinctives of people with this gift? People with this gift will focus on alleviating the sources of pain or discomfort in suffering people. Everywhere we look, we have suffering people. They will address the needs of the lonely and the forgotten. Sometimes pastors or church leaders can't always attend to those on the fringes or those who are lonely or maybe forgotten by others. But those with the gift of mercy can draw alongside and begin to build them up. Express love, grace and dignity to those facing hardship and crisis. Serve in difficult or unsightly circumstances and do so cheerfully. There's many instances where people around the world, and you may be one of those watching them from a different part than the UK, and you're serving in a difficult environment, you're serving in an unsightly, you're serving in an environment which may even be a slum environment, but you're doing it cheerfully, you're doing it with God's love, demonstrating the gift of mercy. They'll also concern themselves with individuals or social issues that oppress people. Issues of justice, issues of the environment are very popular to consider nowadays, and the Christian church has an answer and a response, and often God will use people in those environments to serve and to help those in need. What about the traits of those who have the gift of mercy? They will be people who will be empathetic, they'll be caring, they'll be responsive, they'll be kind, they'll be compassionate, they'll be sensitive, and they'll be burden bearing. Galatians 6 talks about those who bear the burden of others and being careful to do so they don't get caught up. And that reminds us that there are cautions with using these gifts. People with this gift need to be aware that rescuing people from their pain may in fact be hindering God's work in them. Sometimes people have to push through the pain barriers, push through the difficulties with our support, so simply alleviating the suffering isn't always the answer. We need to guard against feeling unappreciated, since some of the people who will be helped will not show or express any appreciation. That's a challenge for us, because this will challenge our motive. It may even challenge the methods in which we go about showing mercy to people. when we don't get feedback, when we don't get appreciation, when we don't get people who seem to honour the fact that we've gone the extra mile for them. We should guard against becoming defensive and angry about the sources of other people's pain. The next gift that I want to talk about is one that I think is one of the most misunderstood in the Christian church. It's often described as pastoring, or ascribed to the senior pastor of a particular church. In the Bible, Ephesians 4 verse 11, for example, in 1 Peter 5, in John chapter 1, we have this idea of this concept of the shepherd. And as we say, it's most often applied to the senior leader, the senior minister in a church, when in fact that may not actually be the gifting of those involved. So how can we describe the gifting? On screen, it shows you. The gift of shepherding is God's strength to nurture, care for, guide people towards ongoing maturity and becoming like Christ. Now, of course, this may be the gift of the senior leader of a church or senior pastor, but it may not be as well. And I think one of the things we have actually done is restricted this gift, and therefore people don't flourish in it because they don't see themselves as the pastor, because they may never have been to Bible college, they may never have gone and got formal training and come in and taken the leadership of a church. Often that's where we ascribe a title to someone as pastor. But actually the gift in the biblical sense is the gift of shepherding. And that can be applied in many different situations. You may think of someone in your own environment, whether that's in youth, whether that's in small group, whether that's even in a Sunday school or an environment with children. It's the actual gift of shepherding that's the most important that we understand. So what is it? Distinctives of people with this gift: they may take responsibility to nurture the whole person in their walk with God. They may provide guidance and oversight to a group of God's people. But of course that doesn't have to be the whole church. That may be an individual even. It may be a small group of people. They model with their life what it means to be a devoted follower of Jesus. They establish trust and confidence through long-term relationship. And they lead and protect those within their span of care. Just stop for a moment and begin to think. Maybe that's some of your gifts. Maybe that's something that you can identify with yourself. But I'm certain that you can identify in your circle of influence, in the network, in your own environment, people who may not have a title, may not even have a position of authority as such, but they're people with these characteristics. These are distinctives. They are the real pastors. They are the real shepherds. What are their traits? There'll be people who'll be influencing. There'll be people who'll be nurturing. There'll be people who'll be guiding. There'll be people who are discipling, people who are protective, people who are supportive, people who are relational. So you can begin to see that this gift of pastor or gift of shepherd isn't restricted to someone with a formal title, someone with a formal position, someone necessarily with formal theological education. But actually the gift of shepherding or the gift of pastoring can be given to anyone for use in a particular environment. Let that encourage you in your circumstances, in your situation, to look for those who can come alongside you and maybe help you develop in this area. As with all the gifts we've said, there are certain cautions. What might they be in terms of the gift of pastoring, the gift of shepherding? Should remember that it's God who judges those who neglect or abuse their oversight responsibilities. This is a challenging one because we see around the world many people who neglect their responsibilities as leaders or abuse their own positions. And so it's challenging for us who lead to be reminded one day we will have to stand before God. We will have to give an account. The second area of caution with people with this gift need to be aware that their desire to feed and support others can make it difficult to say no. I remember once reading an article that asked the question, can servants say no? Well, the answer to that question is yes, they can. And Jesus often said no to people. Jesus often disappointed people. So being a pastor, being a shepherd, doesn't mean we always have to be running after people. Doesn't mean we always have to be serving them at the expense of our own family, our own spiritual life. In fact, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray, seek his Father, and get his approval from God. That's a model for us who are leading, who have the title of pastor, who have the gift of pastor, or who are shepherding others. Third caution is that they should realise that those being nurtured may grow beyond the shepherd's own ability and need to be freed to move, maybe churches, maybe environments, maybe ministries. They're not our people. If we have been tasked with shepherding them, then we need to steward that responsibility well while God has given us that. And when people grow beyond our ability, maybe we need to move them on to other responsibilities. Maybe we need to move them on into other circumstances and situations. That can be challenging. If we've invested our life into people, if we've invested our lives into other people's lives, spent time loved and cared for, it can be hard to let go. But it's important that we do. I want to look at a final gift today that again I think is highly misunderstood. It's called the gift of administration. There's a number of biblical references that are on screen now for you. 1 Corinthians 12 verse 28 is one of those. And the image behind that particular word is actually the word helmsman. It describes someone who piloted or steered a ship in the New Testament, brought them into dock safely, guided them, steered them to the safety of the harbour. Often what we have done with the gift of administration is that we have relegated that to someone who does the filing, someone who does the paperwork, someone who may answer the phones, someone who does photocopying and typing. And I personally think that we have dumbed down that gift. We've misunderstood that gift, because in the Bible the gift of administration is much more important. It's much more of a leadership function. It's much more something that's directive than simply the tasks of filing and paperwork. Where we see that with people, that may actually be the gift of helps in operation. And so one of the things I think we have to do is actually call the gifts by their proper name, to properly understand their operation and their use, and for them to be effective in our life. Let's call them by what the Bible does. Let's call them by their proper use, irrespective of how we've been taught up to now, irrespective of our traditions or even our church policies. Let's look at the Bible gifts. Let's discover what the Bible says about them and use them according to the Bible. In a subsequent video, I'm going to talk about the gift of the word of wisdom and the word of knowledge, which again I think is highly misunderstood. So let's return to the gift of administration. What does it mean? The administration is a gift from God of being able to understand what makes an organisation function and to plan and execute procedures or processes that increase the church's effectiveness. Can you see already that this is much more than paper pushing? This is much more than typing. That actually someone with the gift of administration may have that insight and that ability and that strategic way to think to actually be able to increase the church's effectiveness. I think that's a great gift to welcome, and we see people who are distinctive in this area, that they can develop strategies and plans to reach identified goals. They can allow ministries to become more effective and efficient as they assist them in these goals or plans. They're people who can create order out of organisational chaos. They can manage or coordinate a variety of responsibilities to accomplish a task. They can organise people, tasks, or events. If you've been around church for any length of time, you will know that the church is a complex organism with many different facets. It can be complex in terms of the people, in terms of the programs, in terms of the organisations, and dealing with volunteers. So the gift of administration can be very helpful in helping us be effective and organised. So what are the traits of people with the gift of administration. These are people who are thorough, they're objective, they're responsible, they're people who are organised, they're often goal-orientated, they're efficient, they're conscientious in fulfilling their duties. Maybe you can think of people like that right now. Maybe you can think of people who thrive in bringing that order and that structure into a complexity of your business, your work environment, or even the life of the church. These are people who should be applauded and welcomed. But once again, we know that there are cautions to be exercised in the use of this gift. First of these is the people with this gift need to be open to adjusting their plans, particularly so that they don't stifle a leader's vision. It's great having vision, it's great having ideas, but sometimes people can come along and pour cold water on those. They can stifle them, they can cause them to be watered down. People with the gift of administration need to be open to change. Could end up using people simply to accomplish their goals without being concerned for their growth in the process. And this is where we need the balance of the pastoral gift, the mercy gift, the shepherding gift, so that we don't end up using people for our own ends in the life of the church or even in business environments, but actually that we are concerned for their growth. In my own experience, I think this is where the coaching model of leadership is both helpful in the biblical context, but also in church life, that we see that we are there to coach people to growth and see them develop into the character of Christ and also to fulfill their calling. Let's look at one final caution. Could fail to see God's purposes being fulfilled in the process of meeting the goal. Sometimes the problem with someone with the gift of administration is that they always see the next goal, the next strategy, the next planning meeting, and they can fail to celebrate what has been accomplished, what has been done. And yet that's a biblical principle, that we celebrate God's work, that we tell of God's great goodness and God's work in our own life and in the life of other people. Celebration is an important thing. I want to leave you in this session with a reminder that you can download some notes and some of the slides that you've seen on here. There will be a link below the video. But primarily I want to leave you with a couple of questions to consider, which are coming on screen for you now. In terms of the gift of administration, why do you think it was so vital to the ministry of the early church? Acts chapter 6 verses 1 to 4 begins to unpack that. And then think about, why is the gift of administration still needed in churches today? Thank you very much for watching. We're hoping that you're enjoying these teachings, and please feel free to give us feedback on how it's helping you, how we can answer some questions. You'll see on screen now the church website and an email address that you can contact us with. God bless you, and we're looking forward to you joining us next time.